Is there any redirect, Mr. Louis Kwan?
Your Honor, a few questions. Before I start, what we have is there are some, during the testimony earlier, during the cross-examination, it was clear that there are corrections that needed to be made. Some of the references on page, I think on page 6 or 4 and 5. As applied to part 2 or volume 3 or volume 2. So we've actually made corrections on that, and Mr. Nees has re-signed it just to correct those. It's just a correction on the references themselves.
So instead of saying volume, it says?
So what it actually has, it was, we believe was maybe a prior, it looks like maybe a prior volume or assembly of the EIS. It is Exhibit A5, and it is pages, save for the first one on page 4 on the top, 16172. It is, it should be page 5-13.
Which part?
It's just out of Appendix 1. So Appendix I. Appendix I is a portion of Exhibit A5.
So you're talking about the parenthetical reference?
Correct. And just the references.
So it should say McCoy and Nees, 2010, and then what?
Page 5-13. So Mr. Nees actually started correcting it verbally. So what we've actually done is made the corrections. He made the corrections here on this one during the break, and he's re-signed it, just so there's a correct reference. So it doesn't change the nature of the testimony, hasn't changed the substance of the provision. All it does, it gives the correct reference page.
Okay.
So we've been able to hand it out to everybody, and if they want to question him again about the page, they'll be able to. But I have a few questions to ask Mr. Nees on redirect.
Okay.
So, Mr. Nees, you had mentioned your question about the report, the AIS report for the Astronomy Precinct, which you co-authored, correct?
Correct.
And can you tell me whether or not that report was actually reviewed by DLNR, the state?
The Astronomy Precinct?
The Astronomy Precinct AIS report,
No, it
yes.
was not.
It wasn't reviewed by SHPD?
Yes, that's correct. It was.
Was it approved by SHPD in 2010?
Yes.
And did that AIS report cover the area, which also includes the TMT project site?
It does.
And was there any challenge to, as far as you know, to the acceptance or approval of the AIS report?
No.
And now this is the same report that was attached to the EIS for the TMT, is that correct?
Correct.
As far as you know, has there been any challenge to the EIS or the AIS report?
Correct.
So you've been asked about burials pretty extensively, right, today. So you're asked about the burials at Pu'umakanaka. Is Pu'umakanaka in the Astronomy Precinct?
It is not.
Is it in the area of the TMT project area?
Several miles away.
Several miles. So it's not even close to the TMT site. So it's not even in the summit area of Mauna Kea, is it?
Correct.
Do you know if a burial treatment plan was ever done for those burials in Pu'umakanaka?
It has.
Okay. It's not that your firm did not do that one. Is that correct?
The burial
The
treatment
burial
plan?
treatment plan.
For Pu'umakanaka?
Correct.
I think we did it for the whole science reserve.
That's the AIS, but the burial treatment plan itself was done by PCSI?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So as far as you know, was that burial treatment plan approved?
I believe it was.
Okay, thank you. You're also asked whether or not there are any burials discovered on the TMT project site. Did you find any burials on the TMT project site?
We did not.
has anybody ever located any historic properties on the TMT project site?
Not that I'm aware of.
Has DLNR or SHPD ever come back and said, go back and look for more historic properties on the TMT project site?
They have not.
So you're also asked about find spots, the two find spots in the close proximity of the TMT site. I believe those were 6 and 8, as you just, in your answers to Mr. Freitas a little while ago. Is find spots given any sort of significance in terms of impacts when you review the archaeology or when you do a survey, an archaeological survey?
No.
So you mentioned that the two find spots, 6 and 8, earlier in some earlier cross-examination, that it was your understanding that these were modern structures.
Correct.
Okay. So would you say they were modern structures with any sort of scientific certainty?
I'm sorry?
So how certain were you, or was PCSI, that these two find spots are actually modern structures?
Very certain.
Okay. Do you, in your opinion, do you believe there's any reasonable likelihood that there are burials either indicated in the surface or by any opening into the subsurface of burials in the TMT project site?
No.
What is your objection?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize we can object during redirect because I would have started way back when. And I need to make some corrections here, but I want to object to this question about him, calls for speculation basically, because he's saying he doesn't necessarily know about the burials. And yeah, so he's asking him to speculate what he thinks those are, and I object to that.
Mr. Louis Kwan?
Mr. Nees conducted the field work. He was actually the field director during that period of time in which they did the the archaeological inventory survey of the Astronomy Precinct, which included the TMT project site.
Overall, the objection. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Mr. Kealoha, do you have an objection also, or what's happening here?
I'm just not sure if my objection was proper, so I was trying to see. But my objection would have been to the characterization, and I think he was talking about Pu'u the Pu'u as not having any historical properties and burials. Yet during my cross-exam, I think we established that there may be undiscovered burials, and I just wanted to clarify that, if I could object to that statement. Is that something?
I'm not sure what your objection is.
Because it seemed like what was stated just now, that there were no burials to the best of his knowledge. But I think to clarify that during some cross-examinations, including mine, it didn't exclude the chance of burials being found that haven't been discovered yet. I don't know if that's the thing I can bring forth.
Okay, I'm not sure there's an objection. You're objecting to the question?
Because I'd already asked about the burials, and I thought it was redundant.
So it's a redirect, so he's able on redirect to have that clarification.
And I also wanted to clarify that the undiscovered skeletons were acknowledged. I mean, possible undiscovered burials.
Okay, that becomes argument, right? So you would be able to turn to the cross-examination and the answers that he gave, and then you have the redirect examination and the answers he gave, and you can argue the two, and I need to give weight to the evidence.
So I wait until later.
Well, we'll wait until the findings and conclusions, and that's why you need to
I got it.
Make sure you take notes and,
I took the notes, but
Okay.
I got the proper place. Mahalo.
all right. Go ahead, Mr. Louis Kwan.
So, Mr. Nees, you're also asked about whether or not you or PCSI use cultural practitioners during your inventory survey. You recall being asked about that,
I do recall.
and your answer was no.
Correct.
In the 20-some-odd years, 25 years that you've actually been working in archaeology, have you ever had cultural practitioners participate in the archaeological inventory surveys?
Have not.
Very vague.
And I would submit even the question asked before was very vague in terms of, I think that was the language used, cultural
Overrule the
practitioner.
objection. It's been answered. Go ahead.
Thank you.
It's not based
The
upon his
microphone.
written. Oh, sorry. I'm objecting because his redirect is going outside the scope of his written direct, which we've all been confined to.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
He's confined to the scope of the cross, which is even narrower.
Okay.
So whatever areas you folks asked, that's what he gets to ask about.
Okay. You know, he's answered incorrectly on a number of things already, and I want to know when can we correct that? Because, for example, he said Makanaka is not in the science reserve. It certainly is.
So you can do it two ways. I guess I might have to give you an opportunity to recross. And then I think that you can also bring your own witnesses that would say something different, and I have to give weight. Okay?
Yeah, mahalo.
I believe the question and the answer to Pumakanaka was actually in reference to, was it in the Astronomy Precinct? And the answer to that, I believe Mr. Nees said no.
Yes.
So you're also asked about mitigation. I think a number of the examiners asked you in relationship to both what you have in your direct testimony as well as your understanding of as an archaeologist. Does the archaeology profession have any regulations it must follow regarding mitigation, archaeological mitigation?
There's several plans you have to write, which is basically outlining how you're going to do the work. Monitoring, burial treatment plans, inventory plans.
I see. So these regulations are actually done by who? Which agency is responsible for enforcing these?
Who
these
enforces
regulations?
that? The state.
What agency of the state?
State Historic Preservation Office.
That's SHPD.
Correct.
That's an acronym. Thanks. So you've had okay. In looking at the mitigation proposed in your direct testimony, which you referred to as a template you're provided, correct?
Correct.
So you've had a chance to look at them. Do you disagree?
I beg your pardon? What is it?
I'm trying to understand the process, but I'm objecting because a number of the questions were already asked. Redundant.
Okay, but I think he's okay. The idea is this:
Yeah, please.
the cross-examination is narrower than the direct examination, which is set out in writing, right? So we have the direct written, then we have cross, which is inside that scope, and what the redirect has to be is inside the scope of cross. So he's going to ask the question to lay the foundation and then ask his question, which he believes, Mr. Louis Kwan, I think, believes it would be a different answer or something to clarify in response to his questions. Okay?
So the repetitive questions is allowed then?
To a limit.
Okay, mahalo.
To a limit. Mr. Sinkin?
I'm going to object to this last question because there was no discussion at all about within the discipline of archaeology as to whether there were mitigation, professional enforcement, or anything of the sort. That was never discussed in the cross-examination.
There was quite a bit of discussion.
There was a lot of discussion about mitigation and how he understood mitigation. We now have a whole new area being introduced of archaeology has its own standards and protocols, and they are enforced by the state and dabba 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 dabba. That was never discussed.
Well, I think it falls within the realm of redirect examination.
Redirect is limited to what was crossed. If crossed didn't raise the issue of professional standards within archaeology, how does that get to be introduced now?
I think that's too fine a distinction. He's raised the issue of mitigation. He's redirect on that issue.
Okay.
So, yes, Mr. Freitas.
Your Honor,
Yes, sir.
I think, truthfully, Mr. Nees had answered my question so truthful that Mr. Kwan is trying to redirect the understanding of his answers to my questions.
That's possible.
Yes, and so I'm saying he's already answered.
Okay, I understand your
He's already
objection.
answered me, and let it set for the record that a lot of the archaeological studies, the way they proceed these things, they can't really tell if there's any of our kupuna under that ground.
I understand. The objection's overruled.
So, Mr. Nees, going back to the 10 mitigation measures that were proposed, and I understand you said that these are not recommendations or proposed or measures that you proposed. Is that correct?
Correct.
So, do you disagree with any of these being appropriate archaeological mitigation?
I do not.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, Mr. Kealoha. Overruled. Yes, Mr. Flores.
And E. Kalani Flores for the record. I just wanted to clarify, so council and UH council passed out a new revised written direct testimony, Richard Nees. So how does that occur in the record? Are they retracting the former written direct testimony that's in the record and replacing it with this?
It looks like it's amended, but it's submitted today.
So it's submitted today as amended.
That's what it looks like to me. It's the same document with
Right.
handwritten amendments
Right.
and re-signed today.
So I'm just clarifying it for the record. So when we get to the conclusions of law and findings of fact, how do we reference one from the other?
You would
He
reference
has to identify it
Okay.
and submit it, like
Okay.
in the evidentiary materials, and then you'll see a different identification.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify because we just got this copy, so I just want to distinguish between the two. Thank you.
And frankly, I would like to have it identified as amended.
Okay.
So it's an amended written direct testimony. Gentlemen, if you wish to continue objecting,
Please.
then I think we're going to I'm considering giving you the opportunity to recross, but perhaps that's not a smart thing to do. Okay,
Your Honor,
go ahead.
the whole thing about this, these are professional lawyers.
Yes.
Okay? Now, if they can't put down the right information for us to study the testimony of this individual and give us the proper right as pro se to understand what they're trying to have him testify about. Now, they throw this last minute thing. I don't think we're prepared to continue completing this cross-examine without giving us time to go through these mistakes that these professionals are doing. So I feel it's only fair that give us that time to understand why wasn't it put in properly for him to testify upon. Because it put me all in a different field. I just feel like I'm not getting a fair chance of getting a thorough cross-examination.
You've made your record.
Thank you.
Ms. Ward?
Judge, while we're making the record, I'd like to make the record for a different issue, and that is that the exhibit list was emailed to us on Friday evening, and that exhibit list for Mr. Nees included several documents that we only learned about on Saturday, obviously, when we opened our email. And it was not posted on the evidentiary hearing site until 1 o'clock today. So for exhibits that are intended to be read and processed and cross-examined on Monday morning, it requires that we have enough time to actually look at the exhibits. And when the written direct testimony is not correct, that means that the exhibits that we look at are also difficult to find since the references are not correct. So I'd like to make that note for the record. Thank you.
You're telling me there was a new, first of all, if it was submitted after 4:30 on Friday, we would upload it typically today.
That's correct.
After 4:30. So the fact you got it at 1 o'clock is a surprise to me.
Well,
I mean,
yes,
that's
but
the procedure I understood, but my understanding is worthless.
I think it was uploaded because I asked them to upload it. However, if we are supposed to know what exhibits to be looking at in order to cross-examine a witness that's being presented on Monday morning, it seems to me it would be fair that the exhibit list be posted at least in time for us to have a look at that exhibit list before we cross-examine the witness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, Your Honor.
Oh, wait, Mr. Kealon has something.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Sorry about that.
I'd like to echo everything Deborah and Mr. Freitas mentioned. I'm still here looking page by page to see what the differences are and what kind of objections I can make. I'm very disadvantaged, and I've been disadvantaged before where UH has made what I consider very sneaky policies that we have to abide by, and I feel very uncomfortable.
How difficult is it to look at this amendment? You don't have to even compare them. It's a handwritten amendment changing the original document. You're not even comparing two documents.
But then he stands up here and he's refashioning the answers that we already got from this gentleman. And so I don't know what this process is.
That's right. And I'm trying to consider whether it's appropriate to do recross. But frankly, I'm being convinced that it would be a bad idea to do it.
I'm not trying to argue with you.
Well, then you shouldn't, really. It's not in your best interests.
I'm not. I'm just very uncomfortable, and I'm trying my best to understand it, and at the same time object because I am lost. I'm a pro se person. Something's happening in front of me that I have no understanding of, and I just want to put that on the table.
All right, Mr. Sinkin.
I'm not even sure about the corrections that were made because at one point it was corrected from some volume to part 2. But that doesn't appear anywhere in the corrections. So I'm not even sure they've corrected the error. As far as recross, I think some issues have been raised that are sufficient to call for being recrossed. This witness
I'll think about it.
Okay.
I said that third time now.
Okay.
So, Judge, if I may,
Go ahead.
the exhibits that were actually sent over, and we did that list again. But these are the same exhibits that are actually listed in the direct testimony. That it's not changed. It's the exact same exhibits. Nothing's added. Nothing's taken out. There's no surprise on it. And it was actually for the convenience and really more for letting the parties know that we were going to be calling certain witnesses. And you suggested maybe not putting them in order, but we put that on anyway. We want to give them
I think I
advance notice
suggested
of it.
before you shouldn't do that. Because
Right.
it creates more confusion, apparently.
Right, but in this
so
case,
I took it orally on the record, and
right. So I have another suggestion about the corrections. Often, as you know, you make corrections to exhibits by errata. So I think Mr. Nees actually corrected it verbally. He was actually doing an errata correction.
Mr. Sinkin's correct. It was not. He said Part 2. That's not what is reflected in this document.
So Part 2 is a reference to where the appendices are. Apparently, Exhibit A5 is Volume 3, and it's divided into two parts, Part 1, Part 2. All the appendices are in Part, or anyway, this Appendix I is actually in Part 2 of it. We didn't list it on here just to avoid confusion. All we did was identified it as Appendix I, which it actually is. And so that's a correct reference.
Well, I think Mr. Sinkin's point is well taken, because if this is a reflection of the testimony, or intended to be a reflection of the testimony, and therefore amending the written statement to simply be accurate, that's not consistent with what the testimony was. So we have a problem. It's an inconsistency. I don't know that it's that, frankly, big a deal, but are you done with your recross?
Yeah, I stated we have no further questions for your direct.
Ms. Aluli?
Are we going to begin redirect
No,
/ recross?
Recross.
Okay.
But I'm thinking about whether I'm going to allow it or not.
Okay.
It was never my intention to have recross.
Well, if I just may add, Your Honor, the issue of the cultural, of the mitigation measures introduces a question to me, because
Yes.
I recognize that for archaeologists, if they're going to be compelled by Ship D to comply with existing monitoring or mitigation measures,
Rules, regulations, standards.
that is
I get it.
completely different from the mitigation measures that were stated on pages 6 and 7 of his witness direct testimony, because those arise out of the in the EIS process that is yet a different matter, and that's why they've got ride sharing. I can't imagine that Shifty's going to make sure everybody's sharing vehicles to go up there, and also the community benefits package. I would find it very irregular if those are the kinds of questions we now have to ask this witness, because are these the customary types of archaeological mitigation measures that he as an archaeologist is required to propose in his AIS that he conducts, and that he testified is something that is allowed under HRS or HAR, etc., because that's not at all. I read this as part of a template from something he hadn't necessarily seen before. That was his testimony, and he wrote the first paragraph on the first page, and he can attest to...
I think you should save it for recross.
Okay.
you don't mind.
Okay.
So I'm going to allow recross examination on the very limited redirect, and I mean limited, and also the submission of this additional, or perhaps you want to call it errata, doesn't matter to me, the written direct testimony of Mr. Nees. I'm limiting the recross to no more than 15 minutes. So it should be narrow. There's a good reason to reduce the amount of time because it's not supposed to be all over the place anyway. So I think the first one is Mr. Ng.
Mr. Nees, does your written testimony as corrected by the amendments make that written testimony more accurate?
In citing the references, yes, the exhibits.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ng. Ms. Ward?
My question is about find spots. One of the exhibits that is listed according to you and is co-authored by you state that remains are either modern or cannot be classified with any level of confidence as historic sites because of their uncertain age, such as many of the rock piles, which are recorded as find spots, following a practice begun by Shipty during a reconnaissance survey of selected areas of the Mauna Kea Science Reserve in 1997. A total of find spots that were recorded, it's highly likely that some of these are actually historic properties.
Are you going to ask a question?
Okay, so did you state in your co-authored study of A122 that it's highly likely that some find spots are actually historic properties?
It's possible.
And that was from the PDF page 5, and from PDF page 106, did you say the remains are either modern or cannot be classified with any level of confidence because of their uncertain age? And as many of the rock piles are recorded as find spots, they may be actually historic properties. And this is page 106. Did you say that in your co-authored study?
Isn't that the same question?
Yes, I believe it's very close to the same question. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Ms. Peixoto? I'm sorry. Ms. Peixoto?
Yeah, I asked you to go first so I can find my question. Because I don't have a transcript.
Nobody has a transcript.
I know, well, I'm trying to
Mr. Ching?
Mr. Nees, I believe that you testified that you and your team did not survey the part of Area E where the proposed TMT observatory is supposed to be sited. Is that correct?
That is incorrect. We surveyed everything up there. We surveyed the TMT site not knowing it was the TMT site.
Okay, I thought you testified that your survey was in the NAR.
We've also surveyed the NAR too.
So you're certifying to us at this time that in this survey you did of the NAR, that you indeed also surveyed that part of Area E that the proposed TMT observatory is supposed to be sited in. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct.
Well, what is correct?
The TMT site's located in the Astronomy Precinct.
But I thought it was located in the so-called Area E. No,
Where's Area E? The proposed TMT site?
that's what I believe.
Well, that's in the Astronomy Precinct.
But the Astronomy Precinct, doesn't that include the Kukahau'ula Ridge and all the way down to Pu'upuleahu, where the Smithsonian Array is, and all of that?
Portions of the Pu'u, yes, are in the Astronomy Precinct.
So did you and your team survey all of those areas?
Which areas?
That's what I'm trying to ascertain.
We surveyed the Astronomy Precinct, the Science Reserve, and the road corridor. And in addition, we did a survey of the NAR, unrelated to OMKM's work.
Okay, which part of the NAR did you survey?
We surveyed the entire NAR.
Does this includes, I'm assuming, the large triangular shaped portion from the access road west, and also that part of the NAR that is at Pohaku?
Yes, it's a triangular shaped area.
And what about the squarish, the rectangular
We
portion that's
surveyed
at
it.
Pohaku?
We did survey that also.
And how much of the science reserve did you survey?
We surveyed all the Science Reserve.
But not necessarily the so-called Area E.
Area E, can you give me a reference to Area E? Is that the TMT site?
Area E is supposed to be the TMT site.
We surveyed that area also.
I see, thank you.
Ms. Bishora?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'd like to have him put this map back up and ask him a question from this map.
Was that map shown to him on redirect?
Well, he made a statement about where...
You can articulate it. Let's keep going, please.
Can you restate if Pu'umakanaka is within the Science Reserve?
It is in the Science Reserve.
Okay, is it in the historic district?
It is.
Okay. Mr. Louis Kwan asked if burials were found at the TMT site. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Earlier you stated that you didn't do any studies on the TMT site, though.
We surveyed the entire area. We did not do it for TMT.
Okay, so the burial treatment plan that you're referring to, is that for the Science Reserve or the TMT site?
Science Reserve.
So there is no burial treatment plan for that you have worked on or that you're aware of for the TMT site?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Mahalo, Your Honor.
Mr. Flores?
E. Kalani Flores, representing Flores Case Ohana. I just wrote two brief questions. Going back to find spots, you stated that find spots are not given in a redirect, the find spots were given the same type of consideration?
Correct.
And what do you mean by that?
As a historic property.
Right, but if a find spot still has a potential to be a historic property because it's unknown at the time, isn't it still given some type of potential in protection?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, any other question regarding in find spots? In reference to find spot 2005.06 and 2005.08 that was made mention in the redirect, who made the determination that these were not historic properties?
Dr. McCoy,
And did you have any part in that determination?
just the recording of it, he made the determinations.
And how did he make those determinations?
I can't tell you, I don't know.
So you don't know that how the determination was made regarding those two find
Based on
spots?
his established criteria, which he did in 1995, I do believe.
Right, so it was done outside of your purview, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Aluli?
Mr. Nees, you've testified previously that the only portion of your witness direct testimony that you yourself drafted was the first Roman numeral 1, education, experience, and qualifications. Is that correct?
That is correct.
As well as those instances where there is a reference to a site as it appears on pages, and by site I mean a ship SIHP number site, as it appears on pages 3 and 4 of your witness direct testimony.
Correct.
And with respect to the mitigation measures that are on page 6 of your witness direct testimony, is it your testimony that these were part of the template that was previously given to you in preparation for this WTT?
Correct.
And these were not, in fact, mitigation measures which you or Dr. McCoy proposed in your archaeological surveys. I know we're looking at exhibits 55 and 56, which were prepared in 2010. So these were not mitigation measures which you proposed in those two documents. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So when you testified in answer to Mr. Louis Kwan's testimony or question as to mitigation measures, it was not your intention to say that these were the archaeological mitigation measures you proposed in 2010.
I believe he asked if I agreed with these.
Okay, so you agree with them, but they were not proposed by you or Dr. McCoy?
Correct.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Mr. Ferguson? Ms. Kihoy? Mr. Chu? Ms. Lightholm? Mr. Sinkin?
Long day, huh? One question. The mitigation measures appearing on page 6 and 7 of your testimony and on to page 8 are not what would be called archaeological mitigation. Is that correct?
With the exception of one, number 1.
With the exception of number 1, the archaeological monitoring.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Vicente?
Did you initial, Dwayne Vicente, did you initial all the crossouts on the rehanded testimony?
I initialed the back page, or signed the back page.
What about the crossouts, though?
No, I did not initial them.
At this time, I'd like to strike the witness. He's not the real McCoy, nor is he qualified. He's using his experiences with Indians, and natives are with the Hawaiian Kingdom, and therefore he should be stricken for that. And we shouldn't be using made-up names like state lands, Hawaiian homes, and all that to assume jurisdiction over what is actually in 1898 Crown and government lands, and it still remains so. It hasn't changed. So the jurisdiction still remains Hawaiian Kingdom. And all the other ones are based on fraud. It should be, his testimony and the exhibits should be stricken from the record. Thank you.
Against impossible odds, Mr. Vicente, you have managed to rekindle my sense of humor. He is the real McCoy. All right, so Mr. Louis Kwan, you wish to respond to that motion?
Your Honor, as we said previously, it really goes to weight, not to admissibility or striking.
Agreed. So respectfully, the motion is denied. Mr. Kealoha?
I just want to thank you for your patience with me and us again.
Try not to undo Mr. Vicente's good work.
I thought about that, exactly. Mahalo. And just tell me if I'm incorrect in presenting
I understand.
something.
I understand.
I don't know if I get to do this, but I'm more confused about your understanding, or mine most of all, of this Area E. Back again. Is there any chance you could show me where this is?
Show what?
Where this Area E is. I'm hoping we're talking about the same area that we started talking about. Or is that not proper?
So, Ms. Ward, are you handing him a copy of what has a single page of?
Well, I like hers better.
I'm sorry?
It's the same map, but hers is clearer.
Okay, so maybe you could hand the witness your single page so he can look at what you're looking at. Would that be helpful?
It's a little bit different. I would prefer to just hand him this.
Oh, it's a different exhibit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a little different. It's figure 3-1, page 3-12 on the final EIS, which is A003.
Okay. Great. That's great. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Kealoha. So now you've handed the exhibit to the witness, and you wish to ask him about that picture?
Just to make sure that I understand that I asked the right questions about the right area.
Okay.
Where is exactly this Area E and its parameters, sir?
Area E is located within the Astronomy Precinct at the end of North 13 Road.
Could you put your finger again? Is it that trapezoid, that dotted line, that entire area, Area E? Is that it, boundaries?
It's the red line, red dash line right here.
Okay, that looks about the same area. Thank you, Your Honor. And if I can clarify a couple more questions.
Sure.
And if it's not proper, mahalo. Do any of the answers, I don't know if this is too broad, to the questions I asked you earlier, have they changed with Mr. Louis Kwan's attempt to clarify those answers?
I would object. It's an unfair question. It's so overly broad.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Okay.
Please answer.
I don't believe so.
So you understood the answer to your question. So he doesn't think that his answers to your earlier questions are really different than the ones his answers to Mr. Louis Kwan's.
And I don't know if I can continue with one more question.
Of course.
You talked about the historical properties with a previous question just recently. And what were those criteria that McCoy used to establish a historic property?
Historic properties or fine spots?
I believed it was historic properties, but I might be mistaken.
I think it was fine spots.
Oh, okay, if you think so, then can we do fine spots?
It was a criteria he established in 1995 regarding sites without, couldn't determine with certainty that they were historic properties and appeared to be less than 50 years old, more modern constructions.
That's the sole criteria.
That's his criteria.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kealoha. Mrs. Freitas? No questions? All right. Mr. Freitas?
Thank you.
When you mentioned modern structures, does that mean that it's structures that aren't built by built under customary practices?
Could be, yes.
So the newly structures that you saw on the proposed DMT sites, would you say they are traditional customary practices?
I believe they know who built them, so yes.
Thank you. I think that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Freitas. So, Mr. Nees, thank you very much. You're excused. I want to take a moment to explain what just happened. So, after every witness from the beginning, you might recall that after cross-examination, I always ask the person who brings the written testimony if you have any redirect. Up until this moment, it was always no. Today, there was redirect. That's fine. That's part of the process, okay? Same will be true for you folks. You might have your written direct testimony. After cross-examination, you might decide, listen, I got to clarify some stuff. You will have an opportunity to redirect. But depending on what is redirected, I may or may not allow recross. I'll give you an example. If the only thing Mr. Louis Kwan was going to do was submit the amended written statement, to me, it's not really anything for redirect. It's for argument, perhaps, rather recross. But because it elaborated into other areas, which I felt only fair that you folks have an opportunity to ask about, which you did, then we allow recross, okay? But we can't go on and on. It has to end. Typically, it's the intention for this process was supposed to be written direct testimony, cross-examination, redirect. But again, it's really a matter of what is in the redirect. Do you folks, do the cross-examiners, should they have an opportunity in fairness to have re-cross-exam? So it's going to be limited, and frankly, in my mind, I thought it could be covered in 5 minutes, but I understand that many people are lay people, not legally trained or lawyers, so I gave you up to 15, but you folks didn't take advantage of me. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to take a chance to explain how that process works. It works this way in trial as well. And I know when it's redirect and recross, it happens very quickly. So it's not like we can go home, study it, and come back. These things happen pretty fast, and I think you folks did great. So thank you very much. Who is on tomorrow, Mr. Louis Kwan?
We will have Mr. Fritz Klasner, K-L-A-S-N-E-R.
Okay, and I gather you've already given everyone the exhibits that you intend to bring in, or?
Yes, it's listed on what we submitted last week.
Okay, so that's already uploaded. All right, and thank you for doing that, but don't do it again. All right, so we'll see everybody tomorrow morning. Oh, before we leave, is there a Shelley Stevens in the house, in the room? She was not here today. Okay, I didn't know, so I thought I'd ask. But thank you, everybody. Drive carefully. It's still very wet out there. See you tomorrow morning at 9. No, thank you, Mr. Louis Kwan.
contested case hearing for the 30-meter telescope project, a proceeding for the State of Hawaii, DLNR, Board of Land and Natural Resources.
The preceding program was a production of Naleo TV.